very shortly. Thank you all for being here, though. Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you. Once again, good morning, everyone. Thank you for your patience. We really appreciate it. This is actually our second meeting with state agencies. So we thank you all for being here. We are the bonding subcommittee, and the bonding subcommittee is a subcommittee from the Finance, Revenue, and Bonding Committee. Legislators have other commitments. They have other meetings to attend at the same time simultaneously. So you may see them coming in and out. But if they are not here, I could assure you they are in a meeting or watching us on the Zoom. Bree, can you please post our agenda for today? Thank you very much. Okay, so for those of you watching at home, you can see our agenda for today. From 10 a.m. to 11 a.m., the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection will be before us. From 11 a.m. to 11:30, the Department of Public Health. From 11:30 to 12:30, the Department of Housing. From 12:30 to 1:30, there's a short break. From 1:30 to 2:15, the Department of Economic and Community Development will be here. From 12:15 to 3 p.m., the Capital Regional Development Authority. From 3 p.m. to 3:30, Departments of Correction. From 3:30 to 4, Department of Emergency Services and Public Protection. And that will conclude our meeting for the day. I would ask that all members try to stay punctual. And if you have any other questions that that you feel need to be answered, please feel free to follow up with the proper commissioner or agency. At this point, I will turn it over to our co-chair, Senator Moore, for a few remarks. Senator?
Well, good morning, everyone. Once again, we have a robust schedule. Thank you to my co-chair for heading this, and I look forward to hearing from all of these agencies how they plan on moving the state forward in their responsibility. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Moore. Representative Piscopo, our ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for coming. I appreciate it. It's important that you're here as we look for ways to best help our agencies. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. And I believe Senator Wong is online. Senator, do you have a few remarks?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate the good work we did on the first meeting, and I look forward to hearing from our agencies to working together and helping make us a better state moving forward. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Senator. And before we begin, I'd be remiss if I didn't give a shout out to my hometown of Waterbury. Waterbury Career Academy last night won their first state basketball championship. And we are really proud of Coach Ronan O'Leary and his students. You know, they are models of when you work hard on the court and in the classroom, great things can happen. So we're very happy for Waterbury Career Academy. Thank you for that. All right, so we'll get into our meeting. Commissioner Dykes, would you like to bring your team up?
Thank you so much, Senator Moore and Representative Napoli, Senator Wong, Representative Piscopo, and members of the bonding subcommittee. We're delighted to have the opportunity to appear before you today. My name is Katie Dykes, and I'm the Commissioner of the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. I'm very proud that DEEP is able to implement 15 capital programs that support a variety of responsibilities. The Clean Water Fund, the DEEP Infrastructure and State Park Improvements Fund, our state-owned dam repair, flood and erosion control, potable water. We have programs to support capital investments at incinerators and landfills. Our open space, recreation and natural heritage programs, hazardous waste state superfund. We have bond funds that are helping us make strides in improving energy efficiency and lowering energy costs in state buildings. And as finally, our microgrids and resilience grant and loan program. As you can see from the list of different programs, we are implementing and striving for success across a broad range of different responsibilities. Our mission spans environmental quality, environmental conservation, and energy programs. And we are really proud to be able to, through these programs, help improve the quality of life and of our citizens across the state, as well as this protection of our natural environment. Many of our programs are critical, not just for DEEP to be able to carry out our duties, but actually to help support municipalities in upgrading and addressing their infrastructure. We know with the acceleration of climate change, a lot of our infrastructure is under stress and needs to be upgraded in order to handle some of the changing environmental conditions, whether it's extreme precipitation events or sea level rise or flooding. These are circumstances that unfortunately are becoming more common and makes our programmatic funding even more critical. We also know that with the federal government, with the support of our congressional delegation, has provided for billions of dollars of new federal funds to help lower the cost of some of these infrastructure projects for states and for municipalities. And a few of the programs that we'll be speaking to today are helping deliver and ensure that Connecticut can access our unfair share of those federal funds and to the benefit of businesses and residents in the state. We're also really proud of our outdoor recreation mission and what we can do to support open space and recreational trails across the state. We've seen a surge in interest in state parks and outdoor recreation more generally, a 50% increase in visitor levels that started with the pandemic, but good news has continued. And so it's really exciting for us to be able to continue to support that level of visitors, both from a tourism perspective, but also for Connecticut residents to be able to get outside and access our beautiful state park resources. We have, of course, a lot of aging infrastructure across our state parks. We are responsible for about 8% of the land area of the state, over 1,000 different buildings if you look all across our state parks. And so we've had a historic investment from the governor's budget in upgrading that infrastructure, including with some ARPA funding that was allocated last year. So happy to speak to some of the progress there as well. We know that the governor's capital budget is recommending $50 million over the biennium to deal with the cleanup of pollution. Many of our communities, especially some of our urban communities, are burdened with significant pollution and brownfield issues, and that's a major barrier to accelerating economic development. So there's $36 million proposed for our most significant pollution problems, which are Connecticut's Superfund sites. We have a cost share obligation for the remediation of those facilities along with EPA. We know that there's a lot of funding also in this budget that's helping us tackle emerging contaminants like PFAS that have been affecting communities such as in Killingworth, who have private drinking water wells that are being affected by these contaminants. As I mentioned, climate resilience is really, really important for our communities, for our critical facilities. Over a decade ago, Connecticut launched the very first in the country statewide microgrids program in the wake of Superstorm Sandy to help ensure that communities would not, that we could maintain critical facilities through microgrids in the face of extreme weather events such as storms. More recently, we have expanded that program to support all types of resilience projects that communities are undertaking. We initiated a grant round last fall, inviting all municipalities, COGs, and otherwise to submit proposals for planning for resilience projects. The good news is that there's an ever expanding amount of federal funding available, such as through FEMA, for climate resilience projects. And we need to build out the pipeline of projects that are prepared, that we can submit into these federal funding opportunities. And so the bond funding that has been provided for the Microgrids and Resilience Grant Program is helping us develop that pipeline of projects so that we can, again, try to address more of our infrastructure issues in the state with federal dollars. So with that, there's certainly a lot of detail in our submissions. I'm happy to take any questions. We have a full complement of our deep senior team here as well who will assist, but really appreciate all the support for these programs that this committee has provided over the years, and delighted to answer any questions you may have.
So thank you so much for your presentation. It was very informative. Thank you for that. A question that I have is around greenways. And we know that greenways improve health. They are recreational activities for people. They also spur economic development in all of our communities. What is the current plan to get all the greenway projects completed in Connecticut?
Thank you for that question. I'm going to introduce our Deputy Commissioner, Mason Trumbull, from our Environmental Conservation Branch.
Representative, great to meet you, and thank you for the question. It's an important one. As the commissioner said, we've seen an incredible increase in outdoor recreation since the pandemic. And with that increase has come wear and tear on our trail infrastructure across the state, both paved, gravel, and then trails in the woods as well. So we received a $9 million bond allocation for rec trails and greenways. That's the largest grant round that we have ever run. We just opened that grant round at the beginning of this year, and the funding opportunity just closed the beginning of March. And we received for a $9 million grant round, we received over 100 applications and over $30 million in projects. So very competitive grant round. Right now we're working with the Rec Trails and Greenways Council to assess those applications, and we'll be announcing funding awards within the next couple months.
Now, thank you for that. And I am hearing from lots of local leaders who want these greenways in their communities for the reasons that we have mentioned. Do you know, are there matching requirements on behalf of the state to tap into any potential federal dollars through the infrastructure bill?
Yes, that's a great question. This funding source leverages there is a match requirement for nonprofits to be able to and municipalities to be able to contribute to this program. We also have a federal rec trails program as well that is run through the DOT, and that funds larger projects. It's a larger funding source. The federal reporting requirements are much more stringent, and so the DOT runs larger projects, paved bike paths, et cetera, that are higher dollar amount, whereas the rec trails program, generally speaking, focuses on smaller dollar amount programs that we run as deep.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for your feedback. And we look forward to following up with you on this important activity that you all are engaged with. So thank you. Any further questions from anyone in the room? Rep. Piscopo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome again, Commissioner, and Deputy Commissioners. Last term, this bonding subcommittee was pretty good with to you with the Clean Water Fund bonding. We allocated a lot of money toward that, and we recognize the need for it, I think, in every one of our towns. But my question goes to the fiscal year just ending 22. It looks like there was no authorization. Have we had trouble getting that through a bond commission and I read your answer to our questions, by the way, on the unallocated. So I just a simple clarification on that would help me. And just in general on the Clean Water Act, because it seems like there's a lot of unallocated sitting there. Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Representative. My name is Graham Stevens. I'm the Chief of Water Protection and Land Reuse. Nice to see you again. Great question on the Clean Water Fund. This is a vital fund which is available to municipalities who have an obligation under state and federal law to maintain their sewer systems. And there's a significant need. We're in the process of completing a new clean water needs survey, where we've hired a contractor to meet with each municipality that has sewer needs and try to assess what their needs are in the going forward. Estimates so far are around $7 billion. That's not immediate need, but that's looking into the future and projects that are in either either being conceptualized, planned, or designed. So what we've seen with respect to the Clean Water Fund is a slowing in the project pipeline. We recently released a priority list, which is the list of projects that are authorized to move forward. And that was $580 million worth of projects. That was a significant amount of dollars for our municipalities to upgrade these systems. But what we've also seen is that municipalities have slowed with respect to those projects. And that's associated with several different things. First off, when municipalities take on those grant and loan funds from the state, they also have to bond for that entire amount, just like any municipal project. So there's been obviously significant competing demands at the municipal level. We've also seen supply chain disruptions, not just slowdowns, but certain types of pipe that EPA mandates is American made has not been available. So those projects have been put on hold in some cases. We've also seen some parts for pump stations, which are require some overseas contributions of parts. Those too have run into problems. So what we've seen is the need has not shrunk. In fact, it's really grown. As the commissioner astutely pointed out, climate change is really taxing these systems. But what we are unable to do is to really, demand that our municipalities move more quickly, just because of the fiscal impacts that they have, supply chain disruptions, and escalating costs, which we are seeing that start to abate. And so hopefully you will see over the next several years that those dollars will be put to good use to upgrade our state systems.
Thank you. Any other questions from any members in the room? Rep. Farrar.
Thank you, Chairman. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being with us today. All of you, we welcome all of you. So great to see you. I did actually have a bit of a follow-up on two areas. One in particular, it's been a couple of years now since we moved to the Passport to Parks model for our funding. And I know for so many of us, the parks have really provided a refuge over the last few years. And thankfully that demand on our parks has really continued. And I just wanted to kind of check in with you all in regards to, is the kind of the funding that is provided through that program enough for some of the ongoing needs, or how can we make sure that, especially with the higher demand, that you have the ongoing support for our parks?
Thank you for that question. Before I pass to Deputy Commissioner Trumbull, I'll say the Passport to Parks program is absolutely critical for us to be able to support the outdoor recreation needs across our state parks. It helps us not only maintain certain full-time staff, but also hire over 500 seasonal employees every summer, without whom we could not meet the function essentially across our parks. So we appreciate the continued support from the legislature. I know that there are proposals that come up every year about, carve outs or exemptions from the Passport program. We're always glad to work with legislators to help explain the importance of maintaining that funding stream intact, especially as we're welcoming so many more visitors to our state. We know, I think any survey that you see about people choosing to stay in Connecticut or choosing to move to Connecticut, always in the top 3 reason why they choose Connecticut is the access to the outdoors and to our parks. We have a park within 15 minutes of every resident in the state. But it takes a lot to maintain those facilities. The Passport program is essential to be able to meet those needs. Accompanying the Passport program is the infrastructure program that in our capital budget that supports the capital investments that are needed to, again, maintain a good state of repair of all of those different treasured facilities across the state, whether it's a bathhouse or it's Hubeline Tower. And so unfortunately, in prior years, we had seen a bit of a curtailment in the amount of bonding that was provided to support that stream of projects. And so we've gotten a little bit behind. We anticipate that we have identified projects of about $191 million, so roughly $200 million worth of backlog repairs and upgrades needed across our parks infrastructure. The good news is last year in the budget, with the support of the governor and the legislature, we were able to get approximately $50 million total, including $21.5 million in bonding plus ARPA funding to help us really accelerate that effort. And so we've started a website called Restore CT. Sorry, I got it wrong.
Restore Connecticut State Parks.
Thank you. And where everyone can see the list of projects that's coming that will be funded in that pipeline. And then in addition to that 50 million last year, we also have, we're pleased to support the governor's budget, which would provide for a $20 million authorization in the biennium to continue that pipeline and working away at that project list. And it's really everything from small upgrades and repairs to make our facilities ADA accessible to, restorations to some of those treasured historical features that are such a big attraction, like Hubeline Tower is one, or the Ely Mitchell Pavilion down at Rocky Neck. So we're happy to speak more to some of those particular projects, but that capital program really operates right alongside the Passport program in helping us to make sure we have functioning parks, great services and amenities, and facilities that are maintained in a good working condition to welcome the public.
Commissioner, you pretty much wrapped it up. I will just say, it's important to know there's the difference between Passport and our deep infrastructure.
Yeah.
So Passport,
Thank you.
16 to 22 million supports our ongoing operations. Our deep infrastructure, as Commissioner mentioned, 50 million supports our not just anything that we're doing for capital improvements, which we currently have about $190 million worth of projects in our park. So that focuses on our capital improvement projects.
So I did just want to clarify, because I so appreciate, again, the comprehensiveness in the answer. What I did hear, again, kind of getting at that 190 million list, that what has kind of been either kind of authorized or proposed at this point, it's still less than half of that overall list. Is that accurate?
Yes. So we received $50 million. $21 million was ARPA funding, which we do not need authorization to use. So that we had available to us right away. The second part of that funding bucket was $30 million in bond funds. $15 million of those bond funds have been authorized, and we are as the commissioner said, we have a list posted on our website of the many different projects we're working on, and we have we plan to submit a request for the remaining 15 million in the upcoming months.
Not unlike some of the other programs that we're talking about today, there's a ramp up that's required in order to be able to accelerate to tackle a broader list of projects. We work closely with DAS, with construction services, and the lead time in the development of this pipeline of projects, especially for increasing the level of activity, is different than sort of a normal year or in recent years when we've had more of a curtailed budget. But having that predictability, not only that we have the increase from last year, but then the continued funding of the 20 million over each year of the biennium gives that certainty for us in working with DAS and others and our project partners that we can ramp up to that accelerated level and then sustain the level of activity needed to deliver all these projects.
Would you be able to deliver more projects beyond that 20 million that it's in the budget right now?
We could certainly, I think that would be a question we want to follow up with the subcommittee on. Certainly, we know that there's a lot of need. We have a prioritization that we've done, a scoring of all of the projects to really assess which ones should move first and so on. And I'd be happy to take that back and provide a response.
Thank you. Thank you all for going through that at so much detail, because I think for any of us that have enjoyed or getting out on a weekly basis, we see the needs in our parks, and we also know that they're a part of our tourism effort across the state as well. And so I know we want to make sure we're putting the care in for the ongoing improvements, as you noted, that are part of that list that you all have so thoughtfully put together. So thank you for those answers. And yeah, please feel free to follow up if there is more capacity that you see it's possible in the coming years. So thank you for that. And thank you to the chairman.
Thank you for those good questions. Representative Baumgartner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and it's great to see you, Commissioner. My questions will center on open space. Due to the bond allocation last year for open space acquisition through OSWA, the town of Groton was able to acquire a 159-acre property in the heart of Mystic. Prime open space, again, 159 acres, very successful and flourishing vernal pool, a very historic site as well, in that it was the site of the Pequot retreat during the Mystic Massacre. So culturally, ecologically, tier 1 land. And I want to thank you for your support in that critical acquisition, probably the largest property acquisition in town history, at least in my lifetime. Connecticut has an open space acquisition or protection goal of 21% of total land here in Connecticut. I believe that was by 2023. We're now at 2023. Is Connecticut on target to achieve that goal? And if not, will the current request for bonding help get us to that point?
Thank you for the question, Representative. My name is Andrew Hoskins. I'm the Chief of Staff at DEEP, and I have the privilege of working with the Land Acquisition and Management team, which runs the OSWA program that you referenced. So in terms of progress towards the 21% goal, that goal is broken down into 2 chunks. So 10% of the land is supposed to be acquired by the state to add to our network of state parks and state forests and other boat launches, other recreational venues. And then 11% of that is to be purchased by our partners, municipalities, nonprofit land conservation organizations, water companies, et cetera. And that's where that OSWA funding comes into play. It serves as a match for those organizations to purchase land as open space. When you look at the 2 parts of that goal, for the 10%, that's the sort of state's portion of the goal, we're at 82% progress. And when you look at the 11% for our partners, they're at about 72%. The 72% is I would say, very conservative estimate because we're really capturing primarily the OSWA acquisitions. But there are acquisitions outside of that program that happen, on the municipal level or just through direct federal funding that we may not be accounting for. We're almost certainly not accounting for. So we're getting ready to update our green plan for the next 5 years, and a big part of that effort will be kind of level setting on our data and ensuring that we're calculating open space properly in Connecticut. So all that to say, we're still a ways off. Funding and sort of consistent, predictable funding is definitely one portion of that. So we're very grateful for the support that we've seen over the past years and for what's called for in the governor's budget for the biennium. But there's also just availability of land for sale. So that's been a constraint as well. So I think, as we're not going to hit the 21% by 2023, but we're looking at ways to continue to meet the need both on the 10% side, which we can talk about with the the Recreation and Natural Heritage Trust program, which is another one of our capital programs, and by supporting our partners' acquisitions through the OSWA program.
Excellent. Thank you. And my last question is with respect to dam repair and removal. As we begun to take steps to remove dams, very old dams throughout our state, it's unleashed a lot of activity within our watersheds, a lot more migration for our fish. And so it's so important that when we remove those dams, obviously restore habitats in the process. With that said, also understand that dams could provide an opportunity for our state to also procure energy or utilize our water systems as a resource to generate electricity. So my question is, have you explored, as you've removed dams or began thinking about removing dams, if the department would consider building dam or rebuilding dams for the purposes of power generation? And if so, are there any opportunities to leverage federal dollars as a result of the infrastructure law?
Just happy to jump in, and then I'll pass to Graham Stevens. I am grateful for that question. We're actually, as you've highlighted, I think better than any of us could, there are many different competing priorities in terms of our objectives for dam removal, dam maintenance, dam safety, and as well as upgrades for power production. And it's very situational, the balancing of those priorities, right? Depending on, we have many of these dams all across the state, some privately held, some municipal, some state owned. And so we are actively discussing, kind of developing a priority list for consideration by the legislature. As I know there's interest. The Energy and Technology Committee, for example, has raised bills that would speak to the power, providing for revenue certainty for power production. We know how important flood control and dam safety and maintenance is, as you see reflected in our capital budget, especially to address, the acceleration of climate change and these more intense precipitation events that we're experiencing. And then we've also been working with municipal partners and others on dam removal projects to restore fish passage. But it's very at the present moment, we don't have sort of like a uniform or a cohesive kind of policy that can assess or that would provide a recommendation for prioritization of those different objectives across each of the dams in the state. But it's something that we're actively discussing, looking to make a hire on our team, our policy office that could lead on that effort. And to the extent that the legislative session concludes providing for more authorization for power procurement, or, again, the importance of the continued support for dam safety improvements and so on, that would then help feed into this prioritization exercise to help us ensure that we're delivering or directing these dollars to those locations and those sites that make the most sense. And I don't know, Graham, if you want to add or to the point about federal funding as well.
Yeah, and again, excellent question and great response, Commissioner. Not much to add there, but I would say that there are other funds that are outside of our capital portfolio that are available for certain projects, whether it be habitat enhancement and dam protection, or whether it be dam removal, or whether it be fish passage, or securing the dam to protect that asset for future use for energy purposes, or protect a recreational resource. So those funds are available. Some are competitive, some are funds that come through deep through our Long Island Sound study, which is a US EPA grant that's provided to the state of Connecticut and to the state of New York to manage the Long Island Sound. And there are opportunities when the dam is obviously not an asset available for energy or not an asset available for recreation, that those dams can be brought down with partners at the municipal and the NGO level. So excellent question.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you so much for those good questions. Now we'll take some questions from our members who are online. We'll start with our co-chair, Senator Moore. Senator?
Good morning, and good morning to your team. Thank you for coming, Commissioner. It's very interesting. Unless you sit on an environment, a lot of this information you don't get. So I do really appreciate the sharing, and for your staff also. You know, the dam piece that you mentioned earlier, so that you don't have right now a policy on how you're going to handle all of these dams, or a comprehensive plan on how to address them. Is that correct?
I think we have policies across all the different parts of DEEP, and we're working on certain types of programs within, the environmental conservation branch, within, that's working, for example, on a dam removal project. With the Naugatuck Valley COG, we have energy procurements. The Class 1 renewable portfolio standard provides for some subsidy for run-of-river hydropower. We have our dam safety program that we maintain across the state, but we haven't, to the extent that there's legislative interest in identifying additional dollars or specific energy procurement funding, for example, that could support hydro upgrades. It's really illuminated for me that the need for us to knit together all the different policies and activities that are going on within the different parts of DEEP to be able to provide for some sort of statewide snapshot of what we would recommend are the best facilities to focus on to accomplish all of the different priorities, some of which are competing that we've discussed here this morning.
So that triggers a question for me as we see more money coming into the governor allotting money for housing and upgrades. I have something in Senate Bill 4 that has to do with upgrades and electrification and for homes. I'm gonna connect this to, I had a question about the drinking water, and I know that falls under Department of Public Health. But when you look at all these different type of projects and different funding sources, how do you work with the other agency that you may not have the funding, but it impacts the environment that you're working with?
That's an excellent question, Senator. And it is something that comes up on a frequent basis. DEEP works very closely with partner agencies around state government, whether it be the Department of Economic and Community Development on brownfield projects, which takes into consideration existing infrastructure, and trying to, add housing where it's going to be resilient and have the most economic benefit with the least environmental impact. We also work very closely with our partners at the Department of Public Health on drinking water needs. They have the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund, which is a companion to DEEP's Clean Water Fund. And we have regular conversations with DPH about their drinking water needs and projects, and our Clean Water Fund projects, which deal with the sewer side, as well as discussions with DPH on the emerging contaminants issues around PFAS. So the agencies work very closely together. There's multiple working groups that we sit on, whether it be for transit-oriented development or looking at how the state's plan of conservation and development can be implemented across multiple agencies to ensure that our funding is utilized in the most impactful, most appropriate way to manage development and conservation in Connecticut. So that was an excellent question. Thank you.
And just briefly on the energy side, I don't think there's a time that we've been working more closely with the Department of Housing than in recent years, particularly in thinking about how we can incorporate solar, battery storage, grid resilience, and energy efficiency measures in affordable housing and housing just generally. The federal government is providing an unprecedented amount of funding to achieve that objective. And so that's really drawn us closer in our collaboration with the Department of Housing. And then finally, the microgrids and grant resilience program that's included in the capital budget has enabled us to run this grant round last fall, where we invited municipalities and COGS to provide proposals to help support them in doing planning efforts to identify climate and just resilience improvements in their infrastructure. And one of the benefits or the goals of those planning dollars is to help to provide for resilience for housing in the state.
And
Thank
just to
you.
follow up on that real quick, Commissioner, with the climate resilience, it's a good example of a grant program that's run out of DEEP. But DEEP actually reviews grant proposals with other agencies so that we ensure that other agencies, primary objectives are also considered in our grant dollars and decisions. Same as when DECD is making decisions on brownfields. It's a multi-agency contingent that's reviewing the applications to ensure that there's no issues, as well as that we maximize multiple states' priorities.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for your question, Senator. Next, we'll call on Representative Meskers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that. Commissioner Dykes, good to see you as always. I guess I have a couple of questions, and I guess the most confusing question to myself, so the answer won't be easy, is when I look at the budgetary request from DEEP and I look at what's going on at the federal level, how comfortable or how do you think your budget is shaping up, or your bonding requests are shaping up vis-a-vis the build out of the infrastructure funding or the legislation that's coming through on the Inflation Reduction Act? I guess I'm trying to figure out whether you think that we might be able to reduce our bonding requests from DEEP because there's going to be a substitute in federal allocations, or whether you're going to come to us for interim appropriations or requests because you need further capital to meet the matching funds on a broad-based basis for infrastructure. I know it's like a 30,000-foot question, but I'm trying to figure out, are we likely to be adequately funded to meet the matches that are required, or do you think we might be underfunded on that?
I think it's a terrific question, and I can point to a few examples in the governor's budget that or the bond proposal that align to that. So first off, we have incorporated sort of forward projections of our revenue, of our bonding needs in light of the federal funding that's been provided, the bipartisan infrastructure law, as well as the Inflation Reduction Act. Unfortunately, a lot of the federal programs that have seen a plus up in funding, or new federal programs that have launched, require some level of state or local matching funds to be provided in order to unlock those dollars. So the good news is that we'll be able to tackle more projects and stretch our dollars further by getting federal funding here. The bad news is that we can't take our foot off the pedal in terms of providing for matching funds and supporting with bonding those dollars needed to unlock this federal opportunity. A few examples that show up in our proposal, the funding that was first authorized associated with the Connecticut Clean Air Act last year, that provides matching funds for municipalities, school districts, and school bus operators for federal applications for zero emission electric school buses. This is funding that, we know $5 billion is being allocated under the bipartisan infrastructure law by the EPA for zero emission school buses, but there's a match need and a need for investment in electric vehicle charging infrastructure that our districts are going to need in order to be able to tap into those federal funds. So that's what you see reflected in the ask here. Another example would be, I think, with respect to the microgrids and resilience grant and loan program that we mentioned. That is a program that we have sought increases. Well, first off, there's $5 million in FY24 and in FY25. They're intended to provide direct match for a grid resilience program under the Department of Energy for planning for grid resilience. So that's a match requirement that has increased our needs in that program, reflected in the budget. And then in addition, additional 20 million that's provided for FY25 is reflects the anticipated need for more federal funding for municipalities and COGS to be able to develop a pipeline of climate resilience projects that we can use to submit for FEMA BRIC and other types of federal funding. This is a significant opportunity. Connecticut has outperformed in recent years in getting about 3% of the awards under this competitive national program. But we don't have a lot of projects in the pipeline behind us. So we need to expand that pipeline and then develop. Ultimately, our goal is to develop a state matching fund, sort of like how the Clean Water Fund functions, to be able to help municipalities offset the local match that will be needed. So there's examples of that embedded throughout.
I guess I don't know if I got the right answer to the question. That was profound and helpful. It sounds to me that there is more of a possible skew that you might need additional funding depending on how, for matching dollars is what, I guess that's as simple a question as I'll take it down to, right?
Right.
I mean, you might need more is what I'm saying to get the 60, 70 or 80% federal funds. You may need more on the 10, 20 or 30% from the state to get the matching funds, potentially depending on how the projects roll out. Would that be a fair assessment?
I think what I would say is that what you see in the governor's recommended authorizations reflects everything we know as of this date and have reasonably projected out about what we need for planning dollars, what we need for matching funds for the federal programs that are out there. I will note that like the Inflation Reduction Act, for example, includes a significant amount of competitive funding programs or programs for which no guidance has been released yet by the federal government. So there may be future asks, but within this budget cycle, I feel confident that we've incorporated, a good,
What's out there,
healthy expectation of what we need in order to pursue these programs.
Okay. So then this will be the second and last question with the chairman's indulgence. It's in relation the work you're doing across. I mean, I was going to describe it as an empire, but it's not an empire. It's a mandate we've given you. Indeed, you have a broad-based mandate. And now I know to the side I've got Commissioner Boughton and I believe Steve Nocera, who's doing infrastructure, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm hoping that what I'm hearing from your group in resources and what you do, that we'll have enough of an ability to coordinate with the municipalities to let them know what's available both from the state level and the federal level for matching dollars and participation, because I'm sensing that the next couple of years are going to be very confusing for a municipality to figure out what resources, where to go in the state for various, whether it be coastal resiliency through DEEP, or some things that might be coming through either the EPA or the federal agencies, not in the way of earmarks, but in grants. So I'm hoping that we begin to build a place in the state for either the workshop or knowledge base for grant writing, because when you talk about grant writing, you're skipping across a number of your different parts of your agency. And I'm just trying to figure out how a municipality navigates that opportunity space on grants.
I appreciate that question a great deal. Two things I would point to. Number one, we are looking to establish a new position or use one of our existing vacancies at DEEP to establish a municipal concierge function and a key sort of senior leadership team person who would be a one-stop contact for municipalities. We've established a concierge for businesses and permit applicants who are looking to navigate the permitting process. We've gotten great response from the business community and from many of our regulated entities about having that one-stop shop position, and we're looking to replicate that success with a municipal concierge that will enable us to see across like what's our whole book of business for each one of the 169 towns to make
Mm.
sure that we're connecting towns to the right opportunities and helping them navigate all of these different federal funding opportunities. The climate resilience grant program, I also want to point to as an example of how we're trying to develop or provide more support to municipalities for planning, which is intended in a comprehensive way, because that resilience program is intended to cover electric, grid resilience and traditional sort of climate resilience that we've thought about. And so just even pushing out those opportunities for municipalities to be able to do community engagement, hire consultants, develop the planning, identify what projects they need, is really important to then help municipalities then know what they want to do, what they need to do, and then we can help with the rest in terms of plugging them in to the the whole alphabet soup of different federal funding programs that have been authorized.
And from me, I would just ask that you coordinate with DECD for whatever funding they see from the state and DOT, because there's a lot of stuff that comes down from the feds that seems, I don't think the scope of understanding, I can't even understand it. I've granted it's only been 5 years, and but it's amazing to me that everything seems to be a little too siloed in terms of how we get the grants from the federal government for the various business activities of municipalities. So
And I think
any help you can coordinate would be great.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I will say one of our challenges is that the federal government has its own silos.
Yes.
And different programs that may have overlapping objectives have been authorized under, for example, the Inflation Reduction Act, but given to different agencies, EPA over here, DOE over there. And so I will say that one of the benefits 10 years ago when Public Act 1180 created DEEP as a consolidated agency with environment, natural resources, environmental quality, and energy under one roof, we're reaping that benefit now because when I talk to other states and they're trying to figure out how to really braid these funds together, it's 3-4 different agencies or different commissioners maybe talking to those different federal agencies, and there's no one wants to step on each other's toes. But we're, as a merged agency, we have that ability to try to approach these things comprehensively and pull DOE funding together with EPA funding together with NOAA funding together with FEMA funding to deliver on comprehensive projects. But it starts with municipalities getting support to know what they need, right? And develop to be able to identify those needs, and then we can help them do the rest in terms of tapping into the federal funding and ultimately identifying state matching funds that can help take some of the sting out of the local funding that's going to be needed to tackle these projects. But I appreciate the question. It's something we are thinking and working on, constantly. And it's also a good time to plug requests for additional staffing that are in the governor's budget that I had a chance to talk to the Appropriations Committee about the other day.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Chair Napoli. Thank you for the indulgence.
Thank you for your questions and thank you for your responses. Next is Representative Pellio.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the opportunity. Good morning, Commissioner. Thank you so much for being here, and the information that you're providing today is certainly helpful. A couple questions, just follow-ups on the Clean Water Fund. And you mentioned the delay in pipelines with municipalities not moving forward with projects. Can you just kind of give a sense of what types of projects are being delayed? What types of projects are not moving forward? Is it sewer separation? If you can, again, give a sense of what projects are not happening right now.
Yeah, this is Graham Stevens, and I'm happy to take your question. And what we've seen is across the board, there's been a bit of a delay with respect to municipal action under the Clean Water Program. But we have seen that delay is starting to erode, and now projects are starting to move forward. And I think the projects that were impacted the most were those that relied on, large pump station upgrades and large municipal wastewater treatment plant projects. The sewer separation, the sewer line replacement type of projects were easier for municipalities to complete because there weren't lots of sophisticated needs from the supply chain. So I think we did get projects done during the pandemic, but some of those really large infrastructure ones that are related to pump stations and wastewater treatment plants were the ones that were slowed the most.
Mhm, mhm. So you're talking about many of the larger projects then. Has that led to more compliance issues with discharges, more consent decrees or decrees not being followed or complied with? Can you touch upon that with the delay and the backlog of projects?
Certainly. So with respect first to your last question, the backlog, as I've mentioned earlier, there is a $580 million approval for projects to move forward in Connecticut for our clean water needs. With respect to compliance, the good thing is Connecticut is bold and works hard with its municipal partners to protect its waterways and its residents from sewer issues. And the good thing is our systems are not to the point where they would be causing significant compliance issues. So we are ahead of that curve, unlike some other states. So I'm happy to say that this slight delay has not resulted in significant impacts or compliance issues that we would be worried about. And we are looking forward to, again, like I said, a ramp up of those projects in the short term, so that we can see additional impacts and environmental improvements coming to Connecticut.
Mhm. So can you give an idea with WPCAs or with municipalities operating WPCAs, how many consent orders or decrees are out there right now in the state?
So with respect to consent orders, so the state of Connecticut has consent orders with many municipalities. The US EPA is the one that enters into consent decrees. They're essentially the same document. They often relate to different aspects of the systems. And Connecticut has 4 combined sewer system municipalities. All of those municipalities are under consent order from Connecticut Deep to deal with the combined sewer system. There are other municipalities that are under consent order, but typically it's not the tool that is necessary to get the action at the municipal level. Municipalities understand, the WPCAs understand their infrastructure, and they're really looking to Deep as a partner to try to partner in the upgrade of that municipal infrastructure to meet the state and federal Clean Water Act requirements.
Mhm. Okay. Just one follow-up from before. You had mentioned, obviously, municipalities with competing interests, maybe not bonding for these types of projects. Can you just go over how the grant loan portions of these play out with these projects, what the interest rates are, and what percentage is loan, what percentage is grant when these projects from design all the way through completion, what that looks like for the municipalities?
Absolutely happy to provide a little more context on what the Clean Water Fund provides for our municipalities. So for a typical project at a municipal level, whether it be a wastewater treatment plant upgrade or additional sewer rehabilitation, the state provides a 20% grant, an 80% loan, and that low interest loan is held at 2%. So it's I think a very good base program compared to some other states that are similarly situated to Connecticut for our municipal partners. Now, if the municipality is deemed a small community, that provides an additional 5% grant. So that is a 25% grant, 75% loan. And if the project is designed to address a combined sewer system, that is a 50% grant and a 50% loan. And typically the state provides the financing to the municipality for the entire project of all eligible costs. And that 2% loan, thankfully these days, is beneficial to municipalities, and it helps them to complete the projects on schedule.
And that's on a reimbursable basis. How does that actually work on from design all the way through to the completion?
Yeah, so there's also grants for design, and we can provide you a full synopsis on the grants for design, planning, construction, as well as information on exactly how the contracts are executed with municipalities and with respect to the reimbursement basis, that the Clean Water Fund operates under. We'd be happy to follow up with you on that.
I appreciate that. Thank you for taking the time to answer these questions, and I appreciate the information today. And thank you for your intelligence, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you for your questions. I just want to remind our members, we are approaching our 11 a.m. deadline. We can go over slightly, but that is with caution. Next is Senator Wong, our ranking member. Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With caution and speed. Welcome. I'm referencing page 10 of the proposal. I don't have the same thing. It's talking about grant and aid for mitigation of hazardous waste disposal sites. You've got 15 projects cited. Are all these 15 projects active on your roster of remediation?
Senator, I'd be happy to take that. I'm just going to refresh my recollection, if you
Sure.
don't mind, sir. So all of these, so the list of these projects are sites that are active Superfund sites, but the level of activity varies by sites. Right now in Connecticut, the sites with the greatest amount of activity is Raymark. That's the Superfund site that's in Stratford, Connecticut. It's expansive, has many different pieces and components. US EPA is actually using some of its bipartisan infrastructure law money right now to escalate the construction of the remedy in Stratford, which puts a bit of a burden on us to keep up because that project does require a match with respect to construction. And then it also requires the state to take on the long-term maintenance of that remedy. So that is the most active site. Also, we just finished a significant amount of work in Durham with respect to a water main extension. And we are kicking off our obligations for the operation of that facility on a going forward basis. I see that that's not listed on here, unfortunately, but it is a project that just completed. So that is also an obligation.
Great. And as a follow-up on that, can you just for this committee's work, explain a little bit about the federal portion and the funding, the 90-10, how does that percentage work? So can you give a hypothetical if you were going to give a project from your funding of 500,000? What's the allocation of the percentage that comes from the federal government?
Yeah, so
That's always confusing.
It is a bit confusing. It's dictated by the, Superfund law at the federal level. The states have obligations. And it varies. It's usually we have a 10% obligation for construction of the remedy, and then we have the obligation to operate and maintain that remedy. But there are also sites where if the Superfund site is on a state facility or a municipal facility, that cost share can go up to 50%. But typically most are set at the 10% cost share. And a lot of our engagement is really a pull or a push by EPA when they start moving on implementing a remedy. That's when our funding and obligations kick in. So we are happy to see that EPA is moving forward on Raymark faster than we had anticipated. But again, like I said, that means that then we need to come along with EPA to meet our federal obligations under Superfund.
Thank you. And I just want to follow up offline. I'd love to be able to follow up with you and be of any assistance on the South Pine Creek project as well in Fairfield. The second is a quick follow up with the indulgence of the chair is resiliency programs. There's great initiatives in resiliency. There's federal funding from the infrastructure as well as recent funding for projects initiatives. You work very closely in advising many of the municipalities in regards to requirements that are met. Is any of that elaborated in here, or is that part of your ongoing initiative? And what department initiates and collaborates with the municipalities on coastal resiliency. It seems to be a very important issue as we kind of get into the spring and summer weather of hurricane season.
So the microgrids and resilience grant program, we did the RFP last year and we got a great response. We expect in the next few weeks to be able to make some announcements about which projects will get funded from that. So I think that that will be a great time for us to really be able to highlight where we think we've got good momentum from municipalities on and what certain types of resilience concerns or issues they're focusing on, and then where we have gaps. Are there municipalities that we didn't hear from that we know have significant needs? Are there, do we see that we've got more projects and engagement coming in on coastal versus inland or vice versa? So I think we're still sifting through those responses, and then that will be able to help us better highlight where those needs are. But the resilience grant program, and including with the additional 20 million that would be added to that bond authorization in FY25, we see as sort of the clearinghouse for identifying a lot of the needs and the priorities of the municipalities across the state, and then figuring out where there are federal funds that can be provided for match. Once we've identified the microgrids and resilience grant and loan program supports the planning. So you can figure out what you want to do and what you need to do. And then from there, the next step is developing the actual applications to go into the federal government. And that's where the, identifying the matching funds becomes really critical. So federal funding is that we can bring to the table to help offset or for different types of climate resilience needs. But then we have to identify where's the match going to come from for those federal programs. So that's the next piece that we're tackling. I'm thinking of Brett Mesker's question as well. We have some bond authorizations that were provided for the implementation of the bipartisan infrastructure law that have a somewhat of a flexible authorization. And we're anticipating using that, putting that on the table as a state contribution for match for some of these projects that are identified in the planning process. That sounded very bureaucratic. I'm not sure if I answered your question, but I'm trying to.
No,
go quick.
I think I raised the question because obviously it's a proactive measure. I just speak for many of the coastal communities that are heavily populated. Personal property and damages and economic impact is critical,
Yes.
as well as obviously the environmental impact of habitats and birds and people. So nevertheless, I asked that proactively to note that it is an important part of your program. So I thank you.
I think it's
Thank
the
you, Mr.
area
Chair.
where we hope to continue our very close collaboration with this subcommittee, because as we see, I know the IPCC is releasing their latest report. We continue to be on a very worrying trend with the acceleration of climate change. And we're second only to Florida in the percentage of our insured property value that is vulnerable to sea level rise and to these climate impacts. So we have a lot to do here and anticipate working collaboratively to try to make sure we have adequate funding to incent the right kinds of projects.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator. And thank you all for being here today. It gave us a nice reminder of just how much your agency does and all that you have to oversee. And look, thousands of Connecticut residents use some of your programs every single day, and that usage is increasing. So that tells us that you're doing something right. So thanks for being here, and we'll certainly follow up.
Appreciate your questions and support.
So I want to thank the members of this committee. We only went about 12 or 13 minutes over. That's not bad. And our next agency is the Department of Public Health, and we'll let them get settled and then we will begin.
Hello, everybody. This is Commissioner Manisha Jutani from the Department of Public Health. I was under the impression this was largely a Zoom meeting, so we are all remote and on Zoom from the Department of Public Health, but we have our staff on and ready to begin when you're ready.
Thank you, Commissioner. No, that's fine. You may begin your testimony or a brief overview, and then we'll follow up with questions as needed.
Okay, thank you very much. So good morning, Senator Moore, Representative Napoli, Senator Huang, Representative Piscopo, and members of the General Obligation Bonding Subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on the Department of Public Health's capital budget request. The department has provided supplemental information that includes more detail about the direction of the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund associated bond funds and how they were allocated. So I will use this time to give a brief overview of the purpose of this particular program. The program is authorized under Connecticut General Statute 22A-483F to provide loan principal forgiveness to drinking water projects receiving funding from the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund. These drinking water projects are published annually in the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund Intended Use Plan, or IUP. And the goal of the program is to provide additional subsidization to drinking water infrastructure projects that emphasize prevention as a tool for ensuring long-term safe and affordable drinking water in the state's most underserved communities. Thank you for your consideration of this information, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Commissioner. What changes to the drinking water program have occurred in light of changes to federal funds?
So this has been a process in evolution because we have significant funding coming through the bipartisan infrastructure law that are going to enhance the amount of funding available through our Drinking Water State Revolving Fund. But in addition to that, we have additional federal funds that are coming to support lead service lines. We have funds coming to support water systems in schools and daycare centers, specifically around PFAS and other emerging contaminants. And so this particular bond funding, which is aside from the federal funds that we get, is really looking to help subsidize projects that are proposed to our department and help offset some of the funds that projects may get through our Drinking Water State Revolving Fund.
Okay, and you kind of touched upon it. A question I have is, a lot of our school systems are changing from the traditional, a water fountain or bubbler to a bottle filling stations, right? From COVID, we have learned that germs matter, and students are looking for these filling stations. Would this be part of that?
So this would not be per se part of that. What we have is we also have something called the Water Infrastructure Improvements for the Nation Act, or it's called a WIN. And this is to develop and implement voluntary lead testing in schools and childcare programs. So the goal would be so that schools would be able to actually improve their water systems so that they wouldn't necessarily have to go to bottled water as the mechanism that would need to be in a given school system. But these funds are really for those infrastructure projects that would really allow for these projects to be able to fund safe drinking water through our public water systems, including in schools and daycares. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear your question if there was a.
Thank you for that response. Really appreciate it. Are there any further questions? Representative Piscopo, ranking member.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner. Appreciate your presentation. And thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question goes to the lead in school drinking water systems. You have a $5 million unallocated, it looks like. Is that part of your public water drinking project, or is that it's a separate line item, it seems. Can you help me clarify this?
So maybe I can first ask, I'll comment more about what specifically we would like to use it for. But I would ask my Chief Operating Officer, Michelle Schott. Michelle, could you comment specifically on that unallocated balance in terms of where it's coming from specifically?
Sure. So can you hear me?
Yes,
Everybody
we
hear
can
me
hear
okay?
you. Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, the $5 million comes from it. That's the money for the WIN program that you discussed earlier.
Right.
It has not been through the bond commission as of yet, so it has not been allocated.
Right. So I believe that this is an unallocated balance. So this is a
Right.
balance from previous. And so
It's from PA 20-1 13H2. It was part of a governor's bill previously.
thank you for clarifying that. I think what we're trying to say is because it was unallocated and from a different line item, what we would like to do is be able to use these funds to implement the WIN program that we also have some federal funds to be able to start. But our goal would be in the next year or two to be able to use these funds to allow for implementation of this project. So for these projects that will be submitted by requesting programs. And so at this point, we do not have any grants and aid that have been requested for allocation yet. And this would be to be able to help support that further, which is why we're asking for this this permission for this to use these unallocated funds.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Commissioner. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Baumgartner.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Madam Commissioner, for joining us this morning. My question is kind of in the same vein as very similar to the good ranking members. My only question regarding the Clean Water Fund, can you describe how the bond program functions differently than the department DEEP's program for sewers?
So I'll start by maybe giving you a sense of how our program works, because unfortunately I don't know the details of the DEEP program as well. But Clean Water is more through DEEP, and the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund is really what's in DPH. So I often think of this as, the water that would be consumed that would go into human beings' bodies is the water that DPH has authority over to ensure that it is safe to drink. And the way that this, and so, versus water that goes out, and we want to make sure it protects the environment. And so the water that, human beings could consume, this is what the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund that DPH administers really has authority over. This is what our intended use plan has authority over. And so when we get applications, every year we get applications, and we really look at trying to identify which are going to be the most shovel-ready projects, which are going to impact our communities greatest in need. We always look at things, particularly going forward through an equity lens as well, but looking at where there would be need that is shovel-ready, and then create an intended use plan that is then up for public comment period. And it is through this process that funds through the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund are allocated. And then those funds can go out. They are often loans that need to be repaid. Part of what this bond funding would do, and part of what we can do with this, is forgive some of those loans that are given through this Drinking Water State Revolving Fund. So it's a revolving fund because money goes out and then they're repaid, and it comes back into the fund and goes back and forth in that cycle to those programs in need. And the bond funding would be able to help offset some of those loans.
Yes, so municipalities have to bond up for the total cost of the project as opposed to what their share would be.
Right, it would decrease overall their share.
Okay, and my last question is just in terms of prioritization. Does the department prioritize certain water systems over others? I see on this list, for example, a few privately operated water companies that obviously do perform a very much a public function, public service. But just as far as how you score, prioritize applications based off of what entity is requesting those funds.
So there are several components to the ranking system in terms of how projects that are going to be higher ranked in a given year over another. So there are many, many components to this. I'd be happy to have somebody share that with you, or if you want me to tap an expert who's on the call to give you more of what those components. It's about 10 different components or more into creating that ranking system. But some of the things are, as I mentioned, communities most in need, also how shovel ready they are, and also the prioritization of what the need is for. So if there's something that's really more of an acute health risk, there's sort of 4 categories to this. Something like E. coli contamination, or something where it's really an urgent need for health, it would be more highly ranked than something that's just an aging water system and should be improved. That would be probably the most lowly ranked. So there's a prioritization from health risk, sort of 1 to 4, that is also one of the main components to how this rank system is created.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you for your questions. Senator Wong.
Good morning, Commissioner. How long does it typically take a project to be on your radar and then get it shovel ready and then for you to approve it? I'm just trying to better understand for many of the municipalities that may not be aware what entails in that process.
So usually when it comes to us, it may be for a given application cycle. That would be specifically in a given year where they may put it forward. And so before that, there are usually many conversations that are ongoing with our department about a project that may be getting ready. So usually there are several conversations that are occurring before an application actually goes forward. I think at this point, maybe I will tap Deputy Commissioner Morrissey, who may be able to give a little bit of a timeline further on that. And otherwise, we can also ask some other experts if that's not sufficient, Senator Wong. Would that be okay for me to tap an expert on the call?
I'd be happy to respect the time, as the chairman said, and I'd be glad to follow up. And maybe that could be useful public information afterwards. And of this 24 million that's allocated, is it fully accounted for? So if there's any other future projects that are on the pipeline, you're looking to request additional funding. Would that be correct?
So we're specifically, I'm sorry, were you talking about the 24 million from previous, or specifically about the 25 million in fiscal? I'm sorry, go ahead.
December, madam.
Oh, December. I'm sorry. Okay. So the allocated funds as of December. So the proposed projects that you see below on the 3rd page of our document is for this 23.6 million. It may change and there may be some opportunity, but there is a current proposal that we are working with.
Okay, so it's a work in progress. And you don't have full allocation of that money. Would that be correct?
That is correct, that we do not have full allocation so far. I would just ask in terms of when this would be finalized on our end. I will ask if Lori Matthew, do you have an idea of when the final date for this allocation would be?
Thank you, Commissioner. This is for the 24 million that would help subsidize for lead service lines.
That's correct.
Commissioner, thank you for it. Once the intended use plan is finalized, which is coming up fairly soon this spring, that 24 million will be assigned to lead service line projects. And we have sufficient requests for that funding.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that clarification. And if indeed the department has a prioritization of projects based upon need, we had heard earlier in DEEP that they had cited a project or two that are of the utmost priority and complexity. It would be helpful for us as a subcommittee to understand what you're looking as prioritization, and for the various representatives within those communities to be aware of it as well. So I thank you very much for the information. Obviously, this is an ongoing process, and I always appreciate your department's availability. And I want to give out a big thanks to Ms. Methos, because we've had some drinking water concerns in my district, and we've had many meetings, and she has always been a great resource. And I want to thank her for that in public as well. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for your question, Senator. Now I'll recognize our co-chair, Senator Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, Commissioner. Good to see you. Always, always, always. I just have a question. I'm going to go back to the $5 million that was in that public act. What was that money intended for, though? Originally?
So the initial intended purpose, I think I'll need to go back to one of the experts on this call. Is there somebody who knows what the original purpose of that 5 million was for? My understanding is that it was also supposed to be grants and aid for public water systems. So it was more broad, and that we're hoping to focus it specifically on schools and childcare programs. But go ahead, Lori, if you have a comment.
Yeah. Commissioner, you're 100% correct. That was the intent, as I understood it, is to help schools, childcare with lead and focus, help us with the WIN Act.
So I think the question, though, is what was the original intended purpose? Was that the original intended purpose?
I can check, but I believe so. I believe that was the original intent.
Yeah, I believe so as well.
Was it lead abatement in schools?
For drinking water.
For drinking water?
For drinking water.
And why wasn't it used?
Commissioner,
so I believe this was not allocated as of yet, and that's why it was not used.
Correct.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for your question, Senator. Commissioner, thank you so much for being here with us and your testimony and the feedback that you gave us, and certainly you and your staff for the great work that you do for our state. We look forward to following up with you in the near future. Thanks, Commissioner.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Okay, so I want to thank the members of this committee for keeping us right back on schedule. We are now going to start with the Department of Housing, and I believe they're going to join us online.
Good morning.
Good morning, Commissioner. How are you?
Good, good.
Thanks for being with us. And when you're ready, you may begin.
Thank you. Good morning, Senator Moore, Representative Napoli, Senator Martin, Representative Piscopo, and the distinguished members of the General Bonding Subcommittee. I am Seila Mosquera Bruno, Commissioner for Housing. And with me today, I have Deputy Commissioner Brandon McGee and Director of Housing and Research, Michael Santoro. We did submit the written testimony as well as answers to the question of the subcommittee. Thank you very much for having us today. I just will give you some highlights and then we will be open for any questions you may have. So for the past 4 years, the Department of Housing completed 7,413 units, preservation and new construction across the state. Representing about $500 million in state and federal resources, and that generated over $3 billion in development activities. So we also, so those are kind of the highlights on the bonding use of the state resources, leveraging with the federal resources. And as I mentioned, we submitted written answers to your questions, so we are open to any question you may have.
Thank you, Commissioner. A question that I have is, if the legislature passes these recommended funds, how are you going to start using them? And the reason I ask is because last year you spent about $80 million. And there's almost $1 billion when you look at what the governor has committed and the unallocated balance, right? I mean, that's a large sum of money to move. So can you talk to us about your plan to do that, especially with the flexible housing program and the housing trust fund?
Thank you for that question. I'm going to ask Michael to start, and then I'll end with some of the remarks. Michael?
Certainly. Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, members of the committee. We appreciate the opportunity to come before you today. When you look at what we have spent versus what we've actually put out, you need to look at and understand that a typical housing activity takes between 3 and 5 years. So any project that we get today will actually be available 3 to 5 years from now. So we kind of work it in arrears. We have currently, as the commissioner noted, more than 7,000 units coming down the hill at us. We completed 6,000 units, 6,500, I think, somewhere in that neighborhood. So when you look at the money that is being put in place, that is being put in place today so that we can commit to projects that will get built over the next 3 to 5 years. You give us the money today, we don't spend it today, we spend it down the road. We intend a wide variety of activities, and Commissioner will expand upon this, from extremely low income rental housing all the way up to and through home ownership assistance programs and activities. We will, over the last 4 years, almost 4 years now, Commissioner, have created a pipeline of activities that we are actively working with on a regular basis to move projects through the process, get them to permanent financing, under construction, and occupancy. Can we use the money that we are going to get allocated if you approve the governor's budget? The answer is yes. We will do our damnedest to get that money out in the next, again, 3 to 5 years. Commissioner?
Yes, thank you, Michael, for that. And just to a little bit on the processes, when we commit, as Michael mentioned, it takes about 3 years to finish the project. But at the beginning, we do have to commit the resources because we try to leverage not only our resources, but also resources from different programs, federal programs, as well as the private financing with some of the banks that we are working with. One example of also the things that we're doing to eliminate and try to reduce that 3 years to 2 years is simplifying our processes, as well as with our partners, Connecticut Housing Finance Authority. And one example of that is on the time to own, we started that program in June with $20 million from the bonds, and we were able to deploy those resources in less than 4 months. So today we have created a little over 800 first-time home buyers, deploy $40 million in less than a year. So on the development side, we are looking at anything that we can eliminate and be more efficient. And that the way that we deploy those resources on the $40 million was we piggyback with a first-time home buyer from CHAFA and allow institutions, financial institutions that provide mortgages to households to be able to also approved for down payment assistance, a one-stop shop that really allows for efficiencies and cost effectiveness.
So Commissioner, thank you very much for your responses. Greatly appreciate that. And I'm sure that there'll be some more conversations around these important topics. And look, I know that, our state is facing a real housing crisis, and our co-chair, Senator Moore, has been in the vanguard of this, right, trying to address this issue. And I'm sure she'll have some questions for you. In fact, I do see her hand up. Senator?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So good morning and thank you. And it's great to see Deputy Commissioner Brandon McGee. I've missed him, but I'm happy to see him there. So good morning.
Good morning, Senator. Good,
Welcome
good. And good morning to the committee.
Back.
I know. Thank you.
And they say you can never go home. You can always come home. Commissioner, as the chair of housing, and this is my first year, I've learned so much. I've got some great people around me, great resources. I have a wonderful co-chair in Jeff Luxembourg, who is a landlord, understands real estate, works with the homeless. So he helped me really greatly pull this all together and try and see the bigger picture of what's going on here. As a committee, housing committee, so we listen to everybody and hear what it is that they need are, what their needs are, and then we try to devise a plan on with all these bills. But I know, as you can see, many of our bills are conflicting, right? And I think we all want to get to the same place. We want to create housing. We want people to be able to have affordable housing and decent housing. But I wanted to ask you more about what is your role in building a vision that can help hold some of these things together? Because at the end of the day, we've got a governor's bill, we've got a housing bill. I know there's stuff coming out of P&D, planning and zoning, and different bills. What is the vision to pull all these together to see the bigger picture of what we need to do for housing and the funding that, I mean, you've got billion. We're in the B word now for your department, right? And I really want to make sure that we have a vision on what we're going to try and do, whether it's 3 to 5 years. How are we going to use that money, and what's the best way to use it? And how are you working with the governor and the legislators to figure out what's the best plan? Because I think you should be driving that plan with the information that we've provided.
Thank you, Senator, for that question. And yes, it is. We do have a vision. The main goal is to really provide the housing that is needed at all levels. Whether it's an emergency housing, I really don't use the word shelters, but because we're trying to change that to more providing emergency housing with hotel styling, and also providing services, because a person that is homeless is not going to be in 30 days, 120 days, being able to resolve their situation, where we have some deep reasoning why a person is there. But we want to go through that. We also taking care of our working families that are working basically with minimum wages and not be able to afford the rents in whatever place they are or they want to live. And then we want to move on to our middle class, middle income individuals, whether are professionals or people that just got a job and they're going to be paying more than 50% of the rents, moving on to the home ownership. So we have all of these areas where we want to work. And it's not just us, it's not just the resources. We can have all the millions of dollars that we want, but if we don't have a really strategic plan, we're going to be able to utilize those resources and to be able to actually change somebody's life. So it's not only us, the governor's office is very involved with us in these planning parts. It's also our private sector, engaging our financial institutions, as well as our municipalities, our service providers, our partners that are able to do the work. We are a vehicle to provide the technical assistance. We are a vehicle to provide the resources and the programs that will help them with guidance, but they are in the field. And we have been having conversations with our for-profit developers, with our nonprofit developers, our financial institutions, to see how can we work together to really make a significant changes in the next 3 or 4 years. So we do have been working with some consultants. We are very active in the space, putting together and looking at all the different bills that we have and that you guys are reviewing, and we are providing some information to make sure that those bills are actually help us to move our agenda along and being able to really make significant changes.
So my follow, and you said it better than I could have said it. I'm kind of long-winded in words, but strategic plan. Do you have a strategic plan for that money? You know, let's say you get everything that you've asked for. Is there a strategic plan on how that plays out and how you'll be able to use that money?
Yes, we have been working with my staff, and Connecticut Housing Finance Authority and our members of the community for the past 6 months in different areas. So we do have a plan in how to deploy the resources.
And how will we get to review that or see what that is to be able to pull this all together to know that just because we put that money in there, that you're able to lock that money in there? I know there's a need, but how you implement it.
Sure, we can put something together for the committee. We have different, as I mentioned, the different stages of different resources and type of housing that we want to build in different partners. So my goal is that by the end of the session, when the budget is passed, we can up and run with our plans that we have. And we're working right now with a lot of our service provider developers and encouraging them to do more housing and how can we help them not only on the new construction, but we also want to preserve what we have and making sure that people are living in conditions that are not substandard.
And my final question would be, this amount of money that we're going to invest in housing, I understand it's needed. I'm asking, do you have the staff to be able to pull this off?
We have some staff. We're working in hiring some other staff, but as I also mentioned, we work very closely with the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority, and we pull our resources together. And also we're going to be working with our private financial institutions in some of these underwriting on the projects. So we are looking, if I don't have the capacity, I will be looking into our partners to make sure that we get the capacity that we need.
But aren't you the head, correct? You're the head. You're the lead. I want to make sure that what you have to do isn't passed off to someone else, because I think we should be the driver and everybody else is sitting in the car.
Exactly.
So if I don't hear it now and we don't get to where we are later, I'm just saying there was an opportunity to say if you needed internal staff within the state of Connecticut, not other agencies.
Michael, you had your hand raised.
Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you, Senator Moore. You should note that the governor's budget includes 2 additional staff, specifically to bolster our finance office. We are not limited there. We are looking at other opportunities to hire. We anticipate bringing on 7 additional staff before the end of this current fiscal year. But your support on the 2 positions that the governor has put in place would certainly be appreciated. And would help us, in fact, to meet this goal. We will also be looking at leveraging our significant federal resources over the coming period. Thanks to Deputy Commissioner McGee, one of the things he'll be focusing on is staff capacity and what our agency needs are. We appreciate him coming on board, specifically helping us in that avenue. But yes, we recognize there are staff concerns. We are addressing them as best we can. And again, the 2 positions in the governor's budget will certainly help us do that.
Thank you. And then I just want to go back. I appreciate those answers and know that you're looking toward that. We need to know that you have what you need. So when we talk about allotting this much money, awarding you this much money, approving it, that you have everything you need to be able to pull this off. This is a crucial year for us in the way of housing. People are looking, no matter where I go, it seems to be on the tip of everybody's tongues. Even people who have housing are concerned about what's happening in the way of development. You said early on that you did 7,400 units. Is that in the past year?
No, in the past year, the past 4 years, we completed 6,897 units.
Okay.
We also have a pipeline of about 7,400 units, different stages of developments. Some of them are at the beginning, some of them are in the middle of the financing, and some of them are on the construction. Okay. As a matter of fact, I think on the construction, Michael, correct me if I'm wrong, is about 3,800 units that we have.
That is correct, Commissioner. Those 3,800 units should come online in the next 30 to 240 days. And then again, we have a pipeline of an additional almost 4,000 units that will between now and then enter that cycle. So again, housing is a continuum. Every day new projects start construction, and almost every month new units come online. The money you put in place will allow us to continue to push that pipeline through, and the work of the commissioner and the deputy commissioner, along with our very hardworking staff, will make every effort to increase how much we get out on a given basis.
So you said it takes between 3 and 5 years to complete the project from the original implementation?
Yes, Senator, what we've seen is from, if you think of a housing project as, oh, I want to build housing here, if you consider that the start, that is the first concept, it's 3 to 5 years before units actually show up at that location.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I could just sit and talk to you all forever now that I'm on this, trying to go deep on housing and understanding how it works and how long it takes to get something done. It's really interesting because people will talk about housing, and we're talking about that now. And we have, do you know what the number is on how many people are looking for housing right now?
Michael, you have the number?
We don't actually have the number of people who are looking. We do have statistics on need, and we can certainly share that with the committee. Senator, I think we've actually shared that with the Subcommittee on Housing. But if not, we'll follow up and make sure you get our most current data on need. It's available at the department's website. We have quite a statistical base of information out there right now, but we will make sure we get something sent over to you.
Okay.
And senators,
go ahead.
Sorry, just to add a little bit on the concern of about what Michael mentioned from inception to ending a construction project. I'm not comfortable with 3 to 5 years. I want to do it in 18 months to 3 years. And that's my goal with the staff. But we're also looking at other ways to increase capacity. Whether our modular homes, we have visited a couple of a company in Westchester, Connecticut, to see if that can speed up the process. So we're looking at different avenues in how we can speed up the process because we, as you mentioned, we need the housing now.
Well, Commissioner, thank you, because that was my follow-up as to if we look at how many people, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have used the term looking, but what are the housing needs? How are we going to address that need, and how long is it going to take us to get there? So I'm happy to hear you say, you know, you're looking to decrease the amount of time down to 18 months, that's a goal. And I'm happy to hear that. So thank you. Mr. Chair, I know I've asked a lot of questions, but it is my bailiwick. So I appreciate the indulgence. Thank you all so much.
And no problem, Senator. And you asked some great questions. So we thank you for that. Senator Wong.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the Senate Chair for her passion in that arena, because we do have a critical need for affordable, diverse, and accessible housing in our suburbs, in our cities, and in our rural area. And Commissioner, great to see you. The allocations for the flexible housing and the housing trust programs are a big dollar item. I know they work together and they're interrelated, working through CHAFA. Can you kind of educate us a little bit how these two budgeting allocations or bonding allocations work together and trying to address the issue at hand? Because it is a big line item in the bonding authorization.
Michael, do you want to start?
Certainly. Thank you, Commissioner, and good to see you, Senator Wong. So the two programs are slightly different in the way that they operate in terms of the populations that they serve relative to income. The Housing Trust Fund is set up and can serve persons and families up to 120% of the area median income. And it is set up as a fund so that it can actually take in other revenue streams and leverage them with the state resources. unlike the affordable or flexible housing program, which is targeted at lower income population group, and is more flexible in what it can do, but less, it can't actually take private resources into and use them in that fund. So fundamentally, they're two structurally different kinds of programs. Housing Trust Fund, again, we targeted a higher income population group, and that's why we use it in conjunction with CHFA and the Time to Own program, targeting home ownership activities, i.e. a slightly higher income population group. Whereas Flex, or the Affordable Housing Program, we tend to target to deeper income targeted projects, i.e. extremely low and low income households, leveraging a lot of our other federal resources, which also target those extremely low income households. Fundamentally also, trust fund are taxable bonds as opposed to the affordable or flex program, which can be either taxable or non-taxable. So it fundamentally gets down to what eligible use those bonds can be used for upon issuance. That's really the way that we look at the two programs. We leverage them to the best of their statutory ability to access other resources. As the commissioner identified, we didn't spend $3 billion of state money in the last 4 years, but we leveraged $3 billion of other people's money. That is, we think, the best use of our state resources. Right now, we're a little over 3 to 1. That is, for every dollar that we put in state bonding, we get about $3 from somebody else to produce housing. I hope that answers your question.
No, I'm aware of some of the creative and using federal allocations of accelerated credits toward housing, because I know we implemented that in some of the communities that we represent. But talk a little bit more. I mean, it doesn't get enough attention for the great work of the ability to leverage private funding, but also the two funds, the flexible housing and the housing trust. You kind of work in relations to each other, but both of which are under the administration of CHFA as your asset manager.
No, no, sir. So let me, and I apologize, but let me be clear. CHFA is not our asset manager. CHFA takes the lead predominantly for projects which include low-income housing tax credits. They do that because the federal low-income housing tax credit obligations are extremely rigid. The IRS takes the use of their credits to the nth level, I'll say that way. So it is very easy for us to get our compliance done, relying on their observation and monitoring under the low-income housing tax credit program. Projects which do not include low-income housing tax credits do have a compliance and monitoring function at the department. I think you're referring to prior to 2003, we had a very old portfolio both when we were the old Department of Housing and under the Department of Economic and Community Development. In 2003, that old portfolio oversight shifted to CHFA for pre-2003 projects. But anything that DOH funded, the state of Connecticut through DECD or DOH, since 2003, and any of our federal funds, we actually are responsible for monitoring compliance, and we take that responsibility fairly seriously.
I appreciate that clarification. I'm just reading through the summary that's provided by you on page 20 of relations to that. The last sentence of the summary, the flexible housing and housing trust fund programs are generally administered together in support of the state sponsor housing portfolio, with the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority serving as the asset manager for the portfolio.
But that's Michael, that's for the state housing portfolio. That's the portfolio that was transferred to CHFA.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that clarification. So can you explain the difference between the state sponsor housing portfolio, Commissioner, versus what was meant earlier that you guys are administering?
the state housing portfolio is housing authorities, and Michael helped me out here because it was before my time. So those units were transferred to CHFA to be the asset manager. The other projects that we're funding, we are providing the compliance for those, unless they are low-income housing tax credit, as Michael mentioned before, because the low-income housing tax credit is administered by CHFA.
If I clarify a little bit, Senator, maybe this will help. Again, prior to 2003, the state of Connecticut, through the Department of Housing and the Department of Economic and Community Development, funded affordable housing differently. We did not use leveraging during that time period. We would fully fund the construction or activity associated with a project. So we built an elderly housing project. We, the state of Connecticut, provided a grant to a local housing authority or not-for-profit to build a project. No leveraging. We did that under a wide variety of programs such as elderly congregate, limited equity cooperative, moderate rental, low-income housing, and a number of others. Post 2003, the advent of the Affordable Housing Program and the Housing Trust Fund, we changed the way that we fund affordable housing and moved to this leveraging model where we provide roughly 25 to 35% of the cost of a project and use other people's money for the balance. It's that pre-2003 portfolio that we refer to as the SSHP, or the state-sponsored housing portfolio. It's that portfolio that CHFA administers. It's predominantly units through our local housing authorities with some not-for-profits, again, that were built before 2003. The vast majority of the units were built between 1961 and 1998. There were some additional projects done between 98 and 2003 that were also part of that portfolio transfer.
I'm happy to follow up offline, and I'd like to learn more about the leveraging. What just kind of raises a point of question is in this kind of unstable banking marketplace, if we're leveraging, if the project goes belly up, who is ultimately responsible, even though the initial capital outlay you're saying at about 20-30% and it's leveraged through other means? What happens when those financing vehicles doesn't work anymore? Who is bearing the ultimate liability for these projects?
Well, the owner of the project ultimately is responsible for that project. And in large part, I think I need to better understand what you're talking about relative to when a project fails. We have multiple phases through a project. We put financing in place in advance. We make sure that all the financing firm is in place before we start construction. That ensures, with a 99% probability, that the project will actually get completed. After completion, once they're in operation, if we've done our job correctly, we underwrote the project so that it will in fact operate at least to zero, if not in the black. If an unforeseen condition occurs where a project gets into financial problems after they're operational, we would obviously work with the owner to help them resolve those issues. We do that on a regular basis. If for no other reason, then housing is a fluid activity. It relies on things that are not in the owner's control. Tenants being able to pay their rent, costs remaining within a reasonable estimated frame, i.e. in accordance with our underwriting. Certainly be happy to talk to you in greater detail, Senator, about what we specifically see, but please be aware, we typically do not lose projects. We find a way to help maintain those units, even if the current owner has a problem.
No, I
Commissioner?
appreciate that. And I want to thank you for that explanation, and thank you, Commissioner, and all of your staff for your great work. Look forward to working with you. Again, there's a critical need out there, and under your leadership, ma'am, I know we can get there as a state. So thank you, Mr. Chair, for the indulgence of the time.
Thanks for your question, Senator. Ranking Member Piscopo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And we've learned a lot from both our Senate Chair and our House ranking on the trust fund. And I just want to bring it down. I just have a question on that. One last question on the trust fund without wearing it out too much, but you've requested 50 and 50. The governor recommends 200 million and 200 million. As I read your explanation, it's basically for flexible housing program and to implement the governor's two new programs,
Workforce housing.
Workforce housing.
trust fund and the time to own program. What portions of the two of that? See, there's a discrepancy of 150 million. What portions of that is going to work? And as the housing, how come I can't say it? Housing trust fund, working housing trust fund is it describes itself, but can you describe the time to own program? Is that indeed a capital program, or are you giving loans to?
The time to, I can talk about the time to own program is $100 million the governor has in the budget. The time to own program is our down payment assistance that started the June 2022. Is a program that allows families up to 100% of AMI to be home buyers for the first time. In less than 6 months, a little over 800, as I mentioned before, households became homeowners. A very popular program allows for those families that wants to engage in home ownership, which also allows them to build equity. Is a down payment assistance, is a loan, forgivable loan. After the 10 years that a person is in that home, the mortgage is forgivable. We forgive 1/10 every year. That answered your question for the time to own.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I understand better now. And I'll maybe a follow-up after if I could get it a little clearer. These are general obligation bonds we're asking of CHAFA. Is the reason why I'm my questioning. It doesn't seem like we don't usually issue GO bonds to CHAFA. I think it's more of a revolving bond or self-liquidating bond that we have that quasi-public do for us. So go ahead.
It's actually a DOH program administered by CHFA, and why we are working with CHFA is because we wanted to make it a very simple one-stop shop. So CHAFA has the first-time home buyer working with several financial institutions. So we piggyback with that program, so we didn't have to pay any admin. So the $40 million that was allocated this past year has been strictly directly to the assistance for the down payment assistance.
Thank you. Thank you. And just another quick question on crumbling foundations. We're seeing another 50 million in the next 2 fiscal years coming out. Will that pretty much take care of things with crumbling foundations? Do you anticipate us finishing that?
So I'll give you the short answer and then I'll explain. No. Crumbling foundations, the fundamental issue is a long-term problem. Part of the issue that we have is we don't really know to this day exactly how big the problem is or may be. One of the things that we are working on in conjunction with other state agency partners is trying to identify just exactly how big that need may eventually be. You need to understand that the crumbling foundation issue is one which appears over time. When I say that, it's typically 10 to 15 years before you see any sign of an issue, and an additional 10 years before it becomes critical, i.e. the foundation actually fails. So we have time, if you will, to deal with this issue that appears and expands over time. We do not anticipate asking for more money at this point in time, but that's a conversation that you may want to have with the captive insurance company itself, CISIC. They are administering these funds on behalf of those homeowners. My understanding, they've processed claims in excess of 1,000 already, and we really don't know how many ultimately there may be, because I think the last year where they potentially could have funded used the faulty gravel, I want to say was 95. I could be wrong. But if you then extrapolate out 25 to 30 years from 1995, we will start to see issues in some of those foundations 5 or 8 or 10 years from now.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for your questions. I would recognize the good chair of the Banking Committee, Rep. Doucette.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Commissioner Mike, for joining us today. Commissioner, as I think you know, we have had some discussions on the Banking Committee with CHFA this session, which have been fruitful, and I look forward and I'm very excited about continuing those conversations and doing some good things, particularly time to own. We've had some discussions about time to own, and I've worked with the CHFA on that. So I did want to touch on that a little bit. So again, to recap, the governor's budget is asking us for 50 million each year, the biennium, for time to own. And just for some perspective, I know that program you mentioned rolled out in June. When were the first loans actually funded on time to own? It was probably later than June, right? Or was that actually when it started?
The program started June 22.
Okay. And those funds have been exhausted as of, I think that happened earlier this month, or maybe last month, February.
Yeah, 40 million has been committed to it.
Right. So that 40 million was spent over a time span of about 8 months. Is that correct?
Exactly.
Okay. So you see where I'm maybe going with this. Do we think that 50 million is enough for that program, given the demand that we've seen? And given, I think, the testimony that we heard on the Banking Committee, that this is really a big driver in the market right now for first-time home buyers. Every first-time home buyer is looking to get into that program. Do we think that 50 million a year is really enough?
I think so. As you mentioned, we have done 40 million. It's March 20th, the beginning of this month. So 50 million for each of the next 2 years, we think that we can deploy.
Okay. So I guess this is where we come in. I feel that would be inadequate, especially given this was a brand new program that was stood up. We spent the 40 million over, a brisk pace of 7-8 months. The market is so slow right now, the housing resale market, because inventory is so low. So, if, as we hope, interest rates come down, we see some more activity in the housing market, I think we're going to see a tremendous demand for that program. I personally think that we need to double our investment in that program over what the governor's proposed. now, I understand that the trust fund, we've had some discussion, gives us the flexibility. And maybe that's a little bit of a misnomer to use that term, because we also have the flex fund, which we can also utilize for various programs. So that's great. But I do think we're going to need a lot more. We're going to need a lot more for that program, because it's such a huge part of the housing market right now. And then, my second related question to that. So this is basically part of it. It dovetails with the down payment assistance program. We have an unallocated balance, and we've had a line item in the past for the down payment assistance program specifically. And look, there's a $9 million unallocated balance. So I myself am a little confused as to how that line item is there, what that specific line item would be utilized for, in contrast to using the trust fund for DAP and time to own. Could you talk a little bit about that? Because, I think, maybe one of the things that we can do here is to help funnel those funds into the place that I think we all agree that they should be going.
So I'll start, and then Michael can give a little bit of the history here. The DAP program with CHFA is very prescriptive, and it doesn't assist to a homeowner to build wealth. It's a loan, so it's on top of the first mortgage. And the reason why I developed the time to own was to provide the opportunity for many of our working families to be able to tap in and being homeowners and build some equity across the state, regardless of where you are. And we have seen success in that program. So that program does need some adjustments, if you will. But I'm going to ask Michael to elaborate a little more.
And thank you, Commissioner. And this goes back to, in part, the way that we used to do business. The down payment assistance program, the existing down payment assistance program, as the Commissioner identified, is very prescriptive. It is limited in what it can do, how much it can give out to an individual homeowner, and the way that it can be used. The flexibility that we have, both under the Housing Trust Fund and our other programs, allows time to own to flourish where down payment assistance is more limited. The existing down payment assistance program is a revolving fund. CHFA has a pool of down payment assistance money. These funds, this unallocated balance, is there should that fund be completely exhausted. It would allow us to go to bond commission, get an additional allocation to recapitalize that fund. We don't see down payment, as it is currently drafted in statute and regulation, as being flexible enough to assist the housing market. And that is well demonstrated by what we are seeing under time to own. As soon as we launched the program, as you point out, the money started flying out the door. Whereas under the existing down payment assistance program, it's a very a finite niche of activity that can occur. I hope that helps.
No, that makes sense. That is helpful. But as a follow-up to that, do you think if we do see an increase in the use of time to own, that we would need to replenish or add more to that for any reason? Or no, is the 9 million expected, that it's just going to sit there?
No, I don't expect the 9 million to sit there. It's if the existing down payment fund were to get exhausted, we'd go to bond commission for that 9 million and would again replenish that fund. I don't expect that number to need to go up, particularly if the support under time to own comes as anticipated. That's really the biggest flexible part, as the commissioner identified, not only to help people get into homes, but to help them build that equity over the first 10-year period and really lead to some long-term economic benefit, both for the individual households and for the state of Connecticut. Overall, we see that kind of individual wealth growth, promote all other aspects of our economy.
Okay, thank you. So again, to reiterate, I mean, I think we need to really put more into time to own. I'm a big cheerleader for it. I guess the last question would be, would the department be opposed necessarily to having a separate line item in the bond authorization for time to own, so that we know that those funds are going where we want them to go?
Michael?
Thank you, Commissioner. And Representative, let me simply state, we support the governor's budget in all aspects, but we would never say no if the legislature deemed it appropriate to allocate additional resources to the department.
Okay, thank you. One more question, and I think Rep. Piscopo was hitting on this, the workforce housing investment, of which 100 million is sort of informally earmarked within the trust fund. I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk more about that, because as Rep. Piscopo alluded to, there's not a lot of detail as to how that would get. I know there was a suggestion of sort of reviving or standing up a municipal redevelopment authority to, and perhaps I'm getting my concepts mixed up, but could you talk more about where exactly that workforce housing, those funds are expected to be?
Sure, I can do that, and then Michael can elaborate on that. So this fund is to be able to develop more housing for individuals and families that are between 60% and 120% of the area median income. Is also to incentivize private developers to work with the department and being able to set aside percentages of affordable units. We also want to work with our private institutions and CHFA. These are not grants. This fund will be used for subordinate debt up to 3% interest rate. So again, is to incentivize the market rate to provide some more affordable housing.
And would that be new construction or rehabilitation of existing housing?
New construction. This is strictly to produce more housing.
Okay. Any other possibilities for rehabilitation of existing housing within the?
We have in our regular allocation of $150 million for each of the year for affordable housing will also be for preservation. So preservation is equally important to make sure that our residents are living in good conditions and not substandard conditions.
Yeah, I think that's very important too. And again, we've had discussions with CHFA on the banking committee about some of the things that they're doing in small multifamily market. And I think that is going to be an important piece of this. And, you know, it seems to me that CHFA does a great job at what they're doing now. And one way to more quickly build those units or create those units of affordable housing is to utilize the infrastructure that CHFA has to get that money out on the street more quickly. So rather than, you know, stand up and it's not going to be a one size fits all. So that we have new construction, we have rehabilitation, we have home ownership, you know, there's a whole basket of things that we need to you know, be working on simultaneously. But it seems to me that, you know, having a multifamily housing program, working with developers at CHFA who knows how to do these things, to be a subordinate lender, partner with first lenders, you know, however we've been successful at it in the past. At CHFA has a good track record of doing that. So I would like to see a good amount of what we have here, what we're looking at here, allocated towards that, in addition to the new construction programs. And you know, I think we have to, you know, it's obviously we talk a lot in this building about the acute need to build affordable housing as soon as possible and try to make a dent in it. And I think CHFA is equipped to do that. So I'd like to see some of those programs happening at CHFA as well. But really, this is this is all good. I'd just like to see us make sure that we're utilizing all these funds and we're able to put that money out in the street quickly, like I said. So again, thank you for the discussion, and I look forward to continuing it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for your questions. Representative Baumgartner.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Commissioner, for joining us now this afternoon, as well as your great team. A few questions. I won't repeat many of the questions my colleagues asked. Before we move on, though, just from CHFA, obviously they are not here to testify on this package per se, but I did have a question regarding the existing housing stock and earlier that, affordable housing stock we have in the state that is deteriorating. Senator Wong, his line of questioning kind of centered on how CHFA manages, is the asset manager for the portfolio of the good bulk of the affordable housing stock we have here. That since I believe you said 2003, after the state sponsored, having a state sponsored portfolio, you've leveraged some dollars at the state level, which I believe is the low income housing tax credits. In Groton, for example, we have a Section 8 project or project-based Section 8 housing development that leveraged those low income housing tax credits back in 2017 for rehabilitation. And since then, our town has held the property manager of that development in default of their tax stabilization agreement that they had with the town that they signed after being awarded those funds by CHFA. And as a result, and part of the reason the town held the property manager in default is because there's a massive mold problem and health and safety hazards in the home. And so, in this bond package, we see CHFA receiving grant in aid. And so while they're certainly a partner, I do worry that in the past, in terms of our affordable housing stock that we've either rehabilitated or rebuilt kind of on the backs of or I should say with tax dollars. And instead, many of these private developers have received kind of tailor-made tax credits and forgivable loans and have made done quite well at the expense of many of our residents that have to live in these, have no choice other than to live in these homes because they're utilizing these Section 8 housing vouchers. So my question to you is, what tools does Department of Housing have just in terms of working with CHFA to ensure the compliance of these, agreements that are quite complicated, oftentimes, have a lot of moving parts and financing from Wall Street. So I know that was a multi-layered question, but can you just speak to how kind of the Department of Housing can step in and provide assistance to the residents of those homes, and how taxpayers can know that we're being good stewards of those dollars to ensure that they're actually going towards rehabilitating the homes and not corporate handouts?
That's sure. Well, first of all, I just need to let you know that I'm the board chair of CHAFA. So in addition to being the commissioner and have a relationship where we work and make sure that the assets are being managed well. So just for an additional oversight. Now, I just wanted to clarify, I think the project that you're talking about from Groton with Section 8 vouchers is not a Department of Housing or CHAFA development. That's a development that is under HUD, which are two different things. There are some developments that are funded with project-based vouchers through HUD. We do not have any jurisdiction over those developments. Developments that are under CHFA or DOH is a different thing. We do have oversight even though CHFA is being the asset manager, we, the Department of Housing, have the oversight of those developments. Michael, did I miss anything?
No, that's the one question I would ask is, if we could follow up after, I'd like to know the name of the project. We have a good working relationship with HUD, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, particularly the Hartford Field Office. And if we can intercede and assist, we would be more than happy to. So if I can get the name of the project, we'll see what we can do from our side to make sure that the issues are being addressed by that organization that has the administrative oversight to do so.
Yes,
Please.
if I'm not mistaken, the financing, they received $26.8 million through the 4% low-income housing tax credit funds. And that was from CHAFA. And then I believe there was $2.9 million deferred development, and then $50 million in private financing. But yes, we can connect offline. Lastly,
Please.
The Energy Conservation Loan Fund, after the down in Washington, they passed a lot of legislation that where Connecticut can stand to gain as far as receiving financial, additional dollars. But now many homeowners in Connecticut can get heat pumps largely subsidized by through new federal funding. And curious how that can kind of dovetail with the previous work done through the Energy Conservation Loan Fund.
Michael?
Certainly, and thank you, Commissioner. The Energy Conservation Loan Fund could be used to leverage those resources, as well as a number of other energy programs that are out there. That program is administered through one of the CDFIs, the Community Development Financial Institutions. In particular, it's administered by Capital for Change. They use that program in addition to a wide variety of other resources to make the best use of those funds. If somebody is looking for assistance around energy related activities, we strongly recommend reach out to Capital for Change, not just for the ECL program, but the weatherization assistance program. There's HES and these new federal dollars that are going to be coming down. All of them will work together in addition to other programs that we fund through Capital for Change to do housing code enforcement related activities, lead and asbestos abatement, et cetera. So we use the CDFIs, and in particular, the largest one here in Connecticut, Capital for Change, to do those kinds of individual consumer loan programs.
All right.
But we recognize the need and the value. Absolutely.
Thank you. I see that it's 12:30. Commissioner, we've emailed back and forth at your office regarding sitting down, chatting workforce housing with respect to growth that we've seen at Electric Boat and Groton, and love to also circle up offline regarding IDASH, the intellectual disabilities and or autism spectrum disorder funding, grants and aid that goes to private nonprofit organizations. So we can talk about housing for our intellectual and developmental disability community, doing a lot of work in the legislature this year with 5001 with many committee members here as well. So looking forward to that conversation offline. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for your questions. And to close us out is our co-chair, Senator Moore. Senator.
Thank you. This has been wonderful information, and I think we've asked some really important questions as we move forward. You mentioned $150 million, Commissioner, for energizing existing properties. 150 million.
So we have the 150 million for each of the 2 years for our affordable housing development, which includes deep affordability, new construction, and preservation.
Okay, I'm sorry, because I misunderstood that it was just for preservation, the 150 million, but it's not.
No, it's a combination.
All right, thank you. Thank you all. I appreciate your time, and Mr. Chair, that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Commissioner, thanks so much for your time, for being here with us this afternoon. We appreciate it. I'm sure there'll be more follow-up conversations from committee members as we move forward through the process here. And we also want to congratulate your new deputy, who we all know very well and who has a lot of experience and knowledge with these issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you.
Okay, so we are a little bit over our time, but we have a short break here and I will see you all back at 1:30. Thanks, everybody.